reorganizing, and we invite Quintarelli to start, and you have perhaps, we are very late, 10 minutes.
If we can start with the slides.
Yes, please. And
please
keep it in 10 minutes if possible in order to have the discussion.
I will try to rush. Okay. So, radical digital change. I put this cartoon at the beginning because given the time, I don't know, we're all tired. I think it depicts very well what is happening. The tablets looking at the newsstands, we are coming in peace. Think, okay, you are coming in peace, but the fact that you are producing is not peaceful at all. Okay, so let me first start. Okay, what is a computer? I mean, computing power, storage, data transmission, and all with exponential levels. This means that computers will be everywhere, just to quickly summarize. And it is happening, and it's happening at a pace that we cannot imagine, and it's a challenge for regulators. This is a girl who is 10 years old. In 10 years, more than twice the population of North America and Europe combined uses daily Android. Android was born 10 years ago. So in 10 years, from 0 to more than twice the population of North America and Europe combined. Okay. And we have some outstanding effects. If we look here, we can see this is the election of the popes. This is the election of the Pope. And if you look at the picture above, at the upper picture, in the lower right-hand corner, there is a small smartphone of the time in 2005. That may be an NEC or a Nokia or a Motorola. And the interesting thing is that neither of these three companies exists anymore. They have all disappeared, and that happened in 10 years. So things happen extremely quickly. And the reason why things happen, one of the reasons why these things happen very quickly, and giving the exponential trends in the reduction of the cost of electronics, is that the rules of the game are very different when you talk about material or immaterial. I don't like to call it virtual because it's very real. Because in the material dimension, and I call them dimensions because material is not alternative to immaterial. They both integrate. Like length, it's not alternative to depth. They are dimensions. Production costs a lot. Reproduction costs, a significant variable costs. Archiving has variable costs. Transferring costs. Transferring requires times. Manipulation is done by humans, and humans work in working times. While you enter in the material dimension, producing costs, but costs very little, and then reproducing, archiving, transferring does not cost anything. It's at zero marginal cost. And transferring does not require time, and manipulation is done by machines that work 24 hours a day. So this is once you have something that it's always used to be material and it becomes immaterial, the basic rule of the games changes significantly. Then material goods are rival and excludable, while immaterial are non-rivalable and non-excludable, and that poses significant challenges to policy making. Returns are generally decreasing in the material dimension, while they are often increasing in the immaterial space, and this is something that has been studied in the last 20 years. And then integration. The material dimension is disconnected while the immaterial is connected. So if you combine these things, you think at the press, at the general press, for example, which is material and it's disconnected and has significant reproduction costs, and you think at Facebook on the right-hand side, which is connected and has zero marginal cost, you understand some dynamics of certain business. I'm not going to enter more in detail of this because I don't have time. But these different properties in the basic material and immaterial properties have significant impacts. For example, the first one is that a traditional intermediation structure of a central distribution and retail and even a party with a political party with regional offices and local offices, or whatever organization had some value add in the geographic dimension, given that transmitting is does not cost anything, and it happens in real time, and storage increases and computation, blah, blah. Organizations like the ones on the left tend to be substituted by organization models like the one on the right. And of course, this poses challenges. Then, as you don't have frictions, in the material frictions of moving things around and processing and handling, etc., things tend to happen faster. And this explains why the huge success of Android, that it's not a physical thing. Then another consequence is that the world becomes a point. There is a nice comic from Mafalda that you probably know, that Felipe says, can you imagine if everything is here and suddenly Felipe collapses thinking about all the things here? But this is what is happening. Everything is available always, everywhere. And this is a significant change that poses problems in terms of regulation and enforcement and all the kind of political problems that I mentioned before when we were discussing about the possibility of building this network. And then another consequence is that while computing power, computers tended to be centralized, now they are scattered and they're sparse everywhere. We tend to think of computers and devices like our mobile phones or computers that we have on the desk, but this is going to change very quickly. And this is happening in a very short time frame. We used to live for 10,000 years in a material dimension that has had always very slow changes. And now what has happened in the last 10 years, and the last 10 years is because in the last 10 years the internet reached everybody in the first economies, is that this material dimension has been complemented by an immaterial dimension that is becoming the major user interface to the material dimension. And as I mentioned before, computers are changing. We are not interacting as computation moves away from the device and gets into the network, as storage moves away from the device and gets into the network, what we see is that we have interaction with other devices that are not computers in traditional sense, and they are based on the recognition of the identity of the user. And this is the way how we are going to, how we are starting to interact now, and we are going to interact in the future with our data. And these things are going to be pervasive in the fabric of our homes, of our offices. We are not in the buses. We are not going to see them anymore. This is an actual slide from a presentation of a company that, for which I made some advisory. They are building microphones and speakers to put inside of light bulbs and switches connected via a Bluetooth network, a Bluetooth low energy network, and that is going to be one of the way how we interact with our systems. So the way how we think about computers today. So all of this, we are going to be living inside a computer that is going to recognize us and grants us access to the things that we need to do and to our data, etc. So the first point I want to raise is that the material dimension is, for some of us, and will be for everybody, the main user interface for the material dimension. And I explain why I call them dimensions, because they are not alternative and that they are real, for interpersonal, social, and economic relationships. So everything is flowing through this. Mm-hmm. And we're used, as I talk to you, the air does not discriminate. Everything that you hear the same in every corner of the room. And this is how we think of communications. If I get out from here and I go into a pizzeria, there is nothing stopping me to enter the pizzeria. Nothing discriminates. While when you come into these immaterial gateways, we have different intermediaries. The network, the basic level, and then the hardware, the operating system, and the application. And each of these layers can and often do discriminate. We tend to think about computers and ICT, information communication technologies, as enablers, but in the last 10 years, this significant change, the introduction of smartphones, etc., has turned them into intermediaries. So the computers, operating system, application are no longer enablers, but are intermediaries of our communication. Think all the times that you hear that the internet is disintermediating, that the platforms are disintermediating. It's not true. They are re-intermediating in a different way, different from the previous intermediaries. Previous intermediaries were extremely well regulated. New intermediaries in the material dimension, as they grow exponentially because the rules of the games are different, tend to benefit of network effects and tend to practice very smart lock-ins. This is a fishing cage. The fish enters very easily but cannot get outside, okay? Because the kind of regulation that we put in place for the immaterial dimension was specifically aimed to foster the growth of these players, because that kind of economy is sustainable compared to building highways, bridges, cities, etc. So it has significant, and it was very successful. So we didn't put in place any pro-competitive regulation on this part of the economy. And they were very successful, and they became effectively, in these layers, the gatekeepers of the access to information. Very generous gatekeepers, I must say. But controlling the gateway to the material dimension is controlling the main user interface to the material dimension. There is a nice quote that I want to read you. I apologize if I'm going to run 2 minutes more, but this is a quote from Brandeis. In final analysis, size and steel is the measure of the power of a handful men over our economy. That power can be utilized with lightning speed. It can be benign or it can be dangerous. The philosophy of the Sherman Act is that it should not exist, for all power tends to develop into a government in itself. Power that controls the economy should be in the hands of elected representatives of the people, not in the hands of an industrial oligarchy. Industrial power should be decentralized. It should be scattered into many hands so that fortunes of the people will not be dependent on the whim or caprice, the political prejudices, the emotional stability of few self-appointed men. The fact that they are not vicious men, but respectable and social-minded is irrelevant. That is the philosophy and the command of the Sherman Act. It is founded on a theory of hostility to the concentration in private hands of a power so great that only a government of the people should have it. Now, I read this because I believe that we are facing a political problem that starts from the network. And the effects that stems from the network up, we can see, and I'm a computer scientist and I'm presently sitting in the parliament, and I can see now my colleagues talking about a problem of base erosion and profit shifting has been recalled here before, the problem of fake news and the political influence, but also the reduction of consumer protection, the unique bid auctions that tend to lower the compensation and compress salaries, the Uberization of work with reduced labor rights. These are all, forgive me, please. These are, I promise I will finish in 2 minutes or less. These are all effects of the dynamics of the two different kind of properties between material and immaterial. The point I want to make is that to deal with the discrimination at the bottom layer, we introduce the concept of net neutrality, meaning no discrimination, very heavily sustained by the players above, and very clearly sustained by the players above, because their business, their life, depends on the fact that the telecom operators do not mangle the traffic. But the same happens above. We should have we should have provision about device neutrality and to ensure competition. Otherwise, we will not have freedom at the upper level, freedom to inform, to have social relationship, etc. This is the kind of things that we have been going through in the material dimension. This is the ultimate surveillance and conditioning weapon. I just gaze through these are titles in the last few months. Amazon giving Alexa transcriptor, Apple removing apps from China or opening a data center in China, and 112 people detained in Turkey because they use a specific app. I believe, and I quote the Pope, the internet is a wonderful tool for the benefit of humanity. This is the last one. We must work to mitigate its development. We need plurality and freedom of choice built in at all layers. So when we come to the declaration, I warmly and ask you to include the fact at point 4 that the principle, it is not enough to develop the infrastructure, because the infrastructure will develop in a tool of mass conditioning and mass discrimination and mass control. So including the principle of the plurality and freedom of choice at all the layers in the stack. Thank you.